Senator Hayden, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, could I thank Senator Mullen and Senator Cocker for raising this issue. The issue of receiverships and their conduct is something that I've raised in this House a number of times. And I'd also like to, though he's not present in the Chamber, thank Senator Sean Barrett also for having raised this matter on a number of occasions. In particular, he's raised it with the Minister for Finance in relation to the treatment of tenants in buy-to-let properties and the issue of the lack of any code of conduct in relation to the treatment of tenants in properties. Could I just address some of the issues related to the specifics of the motion itself? I think we need to remind ourselves here as to what the motion is about. And the motion is about receiverships. And, in essence, the Minister is correct in that it doesn't concern, in effect, principal residences in terms of, let us be clear again, principal-owned residences. And one of the things that kind of concerns me about the debate so far is that there's been a lot of reference to family homes in the context of owned properties, owned mortgage properties, and not about family homes in the context of rented homes. And I think we need to be very clear here. 1 in 5 Irish families today lives in a rented home. It is a sector that has been growing very substantially. Those are family homes, and if you want to turn around and tell any family who lives in a rented home that it is not their home and that they're not entitled to protection, well, I'd like to be standing beside you when you try that. I must say, for the record, I'm not entirely happy with the government's counter-motion. Again, it doesn't refer itself to the issue at hand, which is namely the issue of receiverships, but talks in general about the whole issue of mortgage arrears. But in relation to the motion itself, and I do very much welcome that it has been put forward, I did take the trouble to get some legal opinion on what was being proposed in the context of the motion, and I do think that there are issues in relation to the motion as it's drafted. I could spend some of my 6 minutes going into those issues, but if you like, Senator Mullen, I will actually give you a copy of my legal opinion at the end of this. But I think one of the issues that perhaps most concerns me is what can and cannot actually be done in relation to the law as it currently stands. And I think one of the points that you perhaps missed in your motion, again taking into account that most of these receiverships, and when I say most, I mean the vast majority, concern buy-to-let properties. In other words, properties that are rented to as a home. And just to kind of remind ourselves about the extent of the issue that we're facing here, there are about 40,000 buy-to-let properties, about 25% of the entire rented market. There are almost 40,000 properties in mortgage arrears of more than 90 days. To date, there are about 7,000 receivers that have been appointed to buy-to-let properties. I couldn't possibly accept the notion that there is no compelling evidence that this sector requires the introduction of regulations to govern the conduct of receivers, because that would suggest that we have had no difficulties in relation to the appointment of receivers to buy-to-let properties. And with that in mind, I just want to read you a case study from the Threshold Annual Report 2013, bearing in mind that at the time of publication of this report, a far lower number of receiverships have been appointed to rented properties. In other words, at the time, it was 503 receiverships that had been appointed to rented properties. The case is Maria had been living in a rented house for 5 years with her 4 children when she received a letter addressed to the occupier. Maria tried phoning the landlord, but there was no answer, so she put it to the side and thought nothing more of it. A few days later, there was a knock on the door whilst getting her children ready for school. 2 men told her that the landlord wasn't paying the mortgage and that they were now taking over. They thought no one was living in the property and told Maria she had to pack up and that they would be back later that day. Now, I would like to tell you that that is an unusual case and one which Threshold does not deal with on a day-in and day-out basis, but it is not the truth of the matter. And I have raised this issue of the governance of receiverships on a number of occasions, and I have raised it with every single one of the principal banks that come before the Finance Committee. And I have to say, in fairness to them, almost all of them and think, in fact without exception, have agreed that there is a need to regulate the actions of receiverships. And I think we would all agree, and I welcome the Minister's comments in this regard, that she's willing to take this on board, and I am certainly willing to make a submission to any inquiry she wants to put forward. But there is definitely a scenario there where there is a particular concern about the behaviour of receiverships, who in many cases flaunt the law in terms of illegal evictions, have put people out on the side of the road, have 3 days before Christmas, in fact, in one case that I'm familiar with, put a woman out on the side of the road with her stuff in black plastic sacks. So let's be clear on what needs to happen. Could I say on a positive note that I do welcome the comments of Minister Alan Kelly, in fact the commitment from Minister Alan Kelly, that he is prepared to amend the Residential Tenancies Act 2004 to enforce a receiver to be placed in the shoes of a landlord. In other words, that all the rights that a tenant has under the Residential Tenancies Act 2004, in other words, to adequate notice, to have their property maintained, to have their deposit returned, would be an obligation of the receiver appointed to a rented property. That would indeed improve the situation enormously, and I very much welcome the Residential Tenancies Amendment No. 2 bill, which I understand that change in the law will be being made. I would just finish by saying, I'm very happy that the Minister has accepted the principles of what is being said, Senator Mullen, and again I thank you for raising it, but I do think it is important to take on board the changes that are proposed to the Residential Tenancies Act 2004 in relation to the issue of tenants in buy-to-let properties.
Thank you, Senator.